Chapter 3, The Wrath of Kane. There's something sacred about the bond between a mentor and his mentee. And when I think back to how the icon, Joseph, and Francisco mentored me, they literally changed the course of my life forever. I had played the role of a mentor to dozens of my employees, but it was now time to develop my first team captain from ground zero, the same way my mentors developed me from ground zero. I had big plans for Kane and hoped that one day he would become my successor. On my trips to New York to help Kane transition into his new role as managing partner of the firm, I often reminisced over something Joseph taught me years ago. On the first day of my internship with Joseph, he explained to me, Vincent, one day you're going to refer to these early days of struggle as your good old days. So never forget what this feels like right now. Never forget how nervous you are right now, the feelings of anxiety, worry, and fear. Because one day, when you're a successful leader, you're going to be having the same talk I'm having with you, but the difference is you'll be in my position and you'll have to encourage a young new protege and tell them stories about your good old days. If you can remember exactly how you feel right now, your people will be able to relate to you. They'll aspire to be like you, but more importantly, they'll believe that with your guidance, they can be successful too. You need to instill the belief in them that if you did it, then maybe they can do it too. Every time I thought about that conversation with Joseph, my eyes would fill up with tears. I remember exactly how I felt on that first day of my internship, consumed by the utter fear that I didn't belong in this new world. Despite this near paralyzing fear, Joseph painted a picture of me one day being in his position, and that alone gave me the glimpse of hope I needed to believe it was all possible. Like every mentor in training, Kane struggled with the frustrations of not being able to get 100% of our new employees to march in unison to the beat of his drum. He would explicitly lay out our process to these young advisors, but he lacked the patience that being a mentor requires. I remember my own lack of patience when I was first learning how to become a mentor. The frustration of wanting someone to succeed so badly that I almost wanted it for them more than they wanted it for themselves. It is an emotional investment that requires the most altruistic intentions, but also requires masterful planning, the way a chess master sets up his every move 15 moves in advance. Kane and I would spend hours together, game planning, debriefing, and talking about the future, our future. Though our age difference was one of a big brother to little brother, he was more like a son to me. It was a beautiful relationship. There were times where Kane and I would be in deep conversation, and my son Cortez would call me on the phone to say goodnight. Though I always took Cortez's call, oftentimes I would rush to end the call with my own son just so I could get back to my mentoring sessions with Kane. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but in my enthusiasm to mentor Kane, I oftentimes neglected the emotional needs of my own son. Though I knew Joseph would have never made this mistake with his sons, and that the icon would have never done this with Valentina, there was something intoxicating about being regarded by Kane as highly as I regarded Joseph and the icon. I remember New Year's Eve that year. I was at Isabella's house with my family when I received a text from Kane. Vincent, while everyone else is out partying tonight, I decided to stay home. I'm sitting in my living room right now, reflecting on the last 4 years of my life and how much you've given to me. And you're the big brother I never had. Thank you for everything you've done for me. I love you. Kane. It was acknowledgments like this that made me feel like my life was relevant. It fulfilled me in a way that was more precious than money, awards, or any success that I may have achieved. The icon always told me that the gift of giving was for the giver, and as thankful as I was for the gift he gave me, I now understood what he meant. It was so much more fulfilling to impact someone else's life than it was to become successful myself. This was the icon effect. On my next trip to New York, I had my assistant Julia arrange an event to celebrate Kane's success and formally introduce him as the new managing partner of my New York office. We rented out an entire restaurant in Soho, hired a DJ, and invited all of our employees and their spouses. I even invited Andre and gave him carte blanche to invite whoever he thought would liven up the party. In true Andre fashion, he invited just about every aspiring supermodel in New York City. It was a way to commemorate this momentous time in Kane's life, garnering indisputable acknowledgement that he would now be our new East Coast leader. We popped champagne bottle after champagne bottle that night, toasting Kane over and over. Though this type of flashy party scene wasn't Valentina's scene, she understood the aspirational brand we were building. Kane was our brand ambassador, symbolizing what was possible as we attempted to motivate all the young guns we recruited to our firm. To have someone as young as Kane running the show sent out a message to all of these young advisors that if Kane could rise to the top this fast, it was possible for them too. Andre poured even more gasoline on the fire by wearing more diamond jewelry than Slick Rick and Liberace combined, showing up with 3 very scantily clad Brazilian girls tending to his every need that night. Even though Kane would always tell me that he wanted a family-oriented life like mine, I could tell that Andre's flashy single life was alluring to him. I suppose I couldn't blame him. When I first moved to New York City, Andre's flashy lifestyle intrigued me too. His over-the-top style was coveted by any young man searching to fill his inner void with symbols of power. "Yo, Kane, come over here and join us, little homie. Alessandra wants to meet you," Andre said, motioning him to sit with him on the sofa with his Brazilian lingerie model entourage. Andre laughed out loud in his slightly arrogant and obnoxious way as he winked at me. It reminded me of my old single days when I first moved to New York, back when Andre used to take me out clubbing with him. One of the girls, Alessandra, sat on Kane's lap in her tiny little barely there dress, flirting with him like a professional. I don't know if Andre's entourage was on his payroll, but they certainly acted like they were paid attendees. Though they certainly amplified the excitement that evening, Valentina and I were not fans of this mildly inappropriate display of public affection. Kane and Andre seemed to really hit it off that evening, and though Andre brought certain elements of distraction into Kane's life, I do remember how comforting it was for me to have Andre as my wingman during my assimilation into single life in NYC. Their interaction made me feel slightly uncomfortable, but I figured that was just a sign of me getting old. I was once young and single too, and I understood Kane's fascination with Andre's high life. Valentina and I stood across the room talking to several of our employees, getting to know their spouses, but I knew Valentina's discerning eye was aware of Andre's antics the entire evening. Overall, the event was a big success, but I could tell that Valentina was not entirely pleased. She felt like Andre intentionally made a spectacle of himself to gain the attention of our young male employees, which he certainly succeeded at doing. We stayed until the end of the event, and as our last guests departed, Valentina and I quickly debriefed with my assistant, Julia. "You sure know how to throw one heck of a party, Vincent," Julia said. "Yeah, I think people had a good time, especially Kane. Did you see how excited our new young employees were? If this doesn't motivate them to work harder, man, I don't know," I said, feeling like this couldn't have been a better marketing event for the firm. "Where's Kane? I haven't seen him for a while," I asked. "He left early with Andre," she replied. "Really? And he didn't even say goodbye." In a conflicted and troubled voice, Julia said, "Well, that's disappointing." He looked a little out of it towards the end. His eyes were pretty dilated, too. I didn't want to say anything, but I thought you should know. I saw him and Andre and those 3 girls come out of the men's room together, and they looked like, well, like they were partying a little too hard, if you know what I mean. I didn't know if I should tell you this, Vincent. I didn't want to upset you at an event like this." No. I'm glad you did, Julia. Thank you. I'll talk to Kane about this tomorrow. Again, thank you for helping me put this event together, Julia. I couldn't have done it without you. You're the best," I said as our 2 drivers texted me, informing me that they were waiting for us curbside in front of the restaurant. We walked out to our 2 black SUVs, and as I opened the door for Julia, Valentina gave her a hug, saying, "Thank you for being our eyes and ears all these years, Julia. My dad always said you were the one that he could trust. He really loved you." Julia's eyes closed softly as she hugged Valentina, saying, "He was such a good man. I miss him so much." Julia worked for the icon ever since she graduated from college over 30 years ago and had been a loyal employee ever since. Her daughter was attending the NYU School of Law, paid for by a trust account that the icon had set up for her before his passing. On the car ride back to our apartment that evening, Valentina asked me, "Honey, what did you think of Andre bringing those girls to the event? Did you think that was appropriate?" I know. It was a little embarrassing. Julia said some of the wives of our employees were a little upset too. I don't want them thinking that every time we have a company retreat and their husbands are away, that this is the environment we foster. I have to talk to Andre about this and Kane as well, I said, acknowledging Valentina's concerns. Thank you, honey. Now, I know how much you love Kane and how proud of him you are. This is really thoughtful of you to throw this party for him. I just can't believe he took off without even saying thank you. Julia's right. It's disappointing, Valentina said. Hey, I agree. Maybe he just got caught up in the moment with Andre. He did look like he was having the time of his life. We were once young and impressionable too. Well, at least I was. Are you saying I'm old now? Valentina asked, laughing as she poked me in the ribs. Baby, you're still young. I'm the old one, I exclaimed. Oh, nice recovery, Valentina replied as she kissed me, reaching over to hold my hand. The next day, Valentina flew back to Los Angeles as I stayed behind in New York for a few more days. That next Monday, I called Andre to talk to him about his antics that evening, but my call went straight to voicemail. I left a message saying, "Andre, this is Vincent. Hey, it was great seeing you the other night. It's been a while, but I have to talk to you about something I have some concerns about. Call me when you get a chance. Thanks, buddy." My flight was scheduled to take off that Monday evening, so Kane and I had an early dinner together. As we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I reviewed our plan for the week. "That was some party Friday night, huh?" I said. "Vincent, I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye that evening. I just got so caught up with Andre, and before I knew it, we were in his limousine with those three hot chicks. Honestly, I don't even remember how we got from the restaurant into the limo. And it was weird because I didn't even drink that much. We ended up going back to Andre's place, and from that moment on, all I remember is waking up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon the next day with that Alessandra chick and her friend in bed with me. I don't even remember what happened," Kane admitted. "What do you mean you don't remember what happened?" It was like I blacked out for a few hours. I remember being at the restaurant and I remember parts of the limo ride, but I don't remember how we even got to Andre's penthouse. I just woke up the next morning with those two hot chicks. It was weird," Kane said. "But did you take anything that night?" What do you mean, take anything? Drugs. Did you take any drugs that evening?" Kane looked downward as he fiddled with his dinner napkin. I could tell he was ashamed. "Vincent, I've never done anything like this before. That Alessandra chick put a pill on her tongue and started kissing me with it in her mouth. And before I knew it, it was in my mouth. And from that moment on, I started feeling kind of funny," Kane said as he could no longer make eye contact with me. "Kane, what were you thinking taking those girls into the bathroom with you at a company event? Do you understand how uncomfortable that made some of the wives of our employees? Seeing the five of you come out of the men's room together?" "Oh, come on, Kane, you know better than that," I said, showing visible signs of disappointment. "I'm sorry, Vincent, you're right. You have every right to be pissed at me. I've just never been the center of attention like that before. And that night, I felt like I was somebody important. You should have seen how pumped up our young employees got when they saw me with those two hot Brazilian chicks. They thought I was the man." "So getting two paid escorts to sleep with you makes you feel like you're the man?" I asked. "Escorts? What do you mean?" Kane naively asked. "Kane, those were clearly working girls. Why do you think they were all over you like that? Kane, part of my job is to perpetuate the legacy the icon and Joseph passed down to me, and I want to pass this gift down to you now. But I need to know that I can trust you. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I asked. "I do, Vincent. I do. I'm sorry. I won't let it happen again. I promise. It kills me to know that I let you down, and I promise I'll make it up to you. I promise. I wish I could have met the icon to tell him what an incredible mentor you've been to me. He would be so proud of you because you." Kane paused as his voice quivered. He looked at me with glassy eyes that were full of gratitude and continued, "Because you have become my icon. I love you, Vincent, he said, standing up to hug me. He hugged me the way a son hugs his father, in a firm yet tender way. It was the same way I used to hug the icon. On my flight from JFK back to LAX, I thought about what Kane shared with me, and it filled my heart with joy. It reminded me of all the mistakes I made while learning from the icon and Joseph, and how patient and forgiving they were with me. I remember Joseph telling me how many times he let the icon down, yet the icon's forgiveness and ability to help him find his true north just made their bond even stronger. I tried my best to mentor Kane with the same level of forgiveness and understanding, in believing that there is no sweeter journey for a mentor than shepherding his protege back to redemption when he has fallen, similar to the story of the prodigal son. I spent the next 6 months flying back and forth coast to coast, continuing to mentor Kane through this huge career transition, and though it was exhausting for me, it gave me great pleasure to know that I was part of something that would honor my own mentors. I always made it a point to tell our employees how lucky they were to have Kane leading the charge. I even gave him credit for things he didn't actually do. I was fully aware that neither the icon nor Joseph ever did this with me. I wanted to create a mini Vincent so badly that I made excuses for Kane, covering up his shortcomings. I had put him on a pedestal that he had not yet earned. Over the next several months, I noticed that Kane would oftentimes lose his temper with our employees, and even worse, with important people we had strong alliances with. Though his ego began to grow exponentially, I thought I would be able to coach him to maturity. But one particular time, he crossed the line. Vincent, I'm not going to let people talk down to me just because I'm young. That dude from Zellum Capital tried to come at me in our last board meeting, so I kicked him out of the conference room, Kane boasted. Kane, we've been doing business with Zellum for over 20 years. That was Davis Zellum, the grandson of their founder, Carter Zellum. Everyone knows he's a hothead. Sometimes you're going to have to take one on the chin with him. It's part of knowing how to manage that relationship. We need Zellum on our side, I explained. But he never talks to you like that. He always talks to you with respect, Kane argued. Yeah, you know why? It's because I make him feel like he's the most important person in the room. I let him be the star. We're in the business of making other people feel important. And you know what happens when we do that? They fall in love with us. Look, I can call his grandfather, Carter, on the phone right now and ask him for just about any favor, and it's done. I built that kind of relationship with him over time. He knows his grandson is a pain in the butt. In fact, he tells me that all the time. But he also knows that I treat Davis like he's important. And because of that, Carter knows he owes me an infinite number of favors. But now that you kicked him out of our board meeting, I have to go apologize to Carter. You let your big fat ego get in the way of business. You can't do that, Kane, I scolded him. The more I attempted to school up Kane on issues like this, the more defensive he got. It was clear that someone was planting seeds of resentment in Kane, but at the time, I didn't know who the devil sitting on his shoulder was. When I returned to Los Angeles, I shared Kane's reaction to my mentoring with Valentina, saying, "Babe, it was like talking to a completely different person this time. Every time I tried to teach him something, he pushed back, defending his position. His ego has gotten out of control. Honey, I hate to tell you this, but Kane just isn't ready. He lacks the maturity and social etiquette required to run the show. He doesn't understand that certain relationships require the white glove treatment, and he isn't mature enough to put his ego aside. I think he has potential, but he has a long way to go. He's no Vincent Montgomery, not in the least," Valentina lovingly told me. She then said, "Look, honey, just sleep on it, and tomorrow you can make a decision on what to do. Maybe he just needs you to talk him through the mechanics of how to deal with these high-valued relationships again. He was probably just embarrassed that he let you down. And don't worry, babe, you'll figure it out. You always do." The next morning, I thought through my interactions with Kane over the last several months. Though his countenance was far more combative and less appreciative on this trip, I figured it was just the pressure of his new position that had put him out of rhythm, for this was surely not the same Kane that once gushed over how much I had changed his life. Just then, Valentina walked into my office unexpectedly. I said, "Hey, honey, what a nice surprise. I thought you were golfing at Terranea today with Leticia." "I was, but I canceled," she said. Oh, is everything okay? Vincent, I need to show you something important, she said in a stern tone of voice. She closed the door to my office and began pacing back and forth in front of my desk, and I could tell she was infuriated about something. It wasn't in Valentina's nature to lose her temper, but I could tell she was about to explode. I'd never seen her so visibly upset. What is it, honey? I inquired. It took every effort within Valentina's disciplined composure to not curse or yell as she slid a piece of paper across my desk. As she fought to keep her voice at a reasonably low volume, she said, "Look at this." It was a report of new corporations recently filed in the state of New York. Number 7 on the list was MKA Financial Inc., which had 3 corporate officers: Michael Kinwell, Andre Dimitru, and Kane O'Connor.